Good afternoon and welcome to the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency Executive Director Candidate Meet and Greet. My name is Helena Haydes. I'm the HR Director at Community Action. And on behalf of the Board of Directors and the Executive Director Search Committee, I would like to thank you for attending this event. Established in 1967 as part of President Lyndon B. Johnson's 1964 War on Poverty, Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency has addressed the needs of people experiencing poverty in Marion and Polk counties. Our private nonprofit agency is a collaborative partner working with local leaders, individuals, and other organizations to identify the needs, the resources, and the opportunities to serve a wide variety of individuals and families. We develop programs and strategies to support individuals and families moving towards self-sufficiency. Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency operates 8 different programs, all dedicated to our mission. What is that mission? Empowering people to change their lives and exit poverty by providing vital services and community leadership. Our vision for the community is that all people are respected for their infinite worth and are supported to envision and reach a positive future. Our more than 300 employees in 8 programs include Head Start, Early Head Start, Weatherization, Energy Services, Home Youth and Resource Center Drop-In, Day Shelter, and Taylor's House Overnight Shelter for Youth, Nutrition First, Arches, Project Housing, Community Action Re-Entry Services at D. Muniz Resource Center, and Child Care Resource and Referral. Today you have the opportunity to meet 2 outstanding candidates for the Executive Director position at Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency. Back in June, we posted this opportunity nationally, and within a month, we received over 80 resumes. We require job applications in my department, so that reduced the number to around 50 applicants. And upon screening those job applications, we had 33 applicants that met the minimum qualifications. 22 went through a first round with a small panel. 8 candidates were chosen for a personal interview at the agency, and 2 were chosen for second interviews today, which occurred earlier today, and an invitation to meet the community, all of you. The process is lengthy, it's thorough, and tests each candidate's skills and abilities. And although the candidates may think it was quite rigorous, we have found that this process results in finding a leader that is knowledgeable, experienced, respected, and embraces the mission of community action wholeheartedly. Each candidate will have 15 minutes to present information to you that they have selected and would like to share with you. Once both candidates are done with their respective presentations, they will each move to a different area of the room and answer questions and meet people for the remaining time. The Board Search Committee has comment cards, which are located over here, so you are also free to make any comments, and I think they're also on the tables, to make any comments, feedback that you have for the search committee, and then place them in the box. The search committee will make a final recommendation to the Board of Directors next week, once all the scores, all the comment cards have been reviewed. And now, I would like to introduce our first candidate, Sherry Bolter. Sherry is the Executive Director at Young Families, which has an early Head Start program in Billings, Montana. Sherry has been a passionate advocate for low-income people for the past 25 years, having dedicated her life to helping disadvantaged and vulnerable population. She sells hope. Sherry has extensive administrative and management experience of nonprofit agencies and is a leading voice in youth homelessness. Sherry is active in several groups with goals to improve conditions of low-income residents and in early childhood education. Sherry has led the expansion of nonprofit agencies' core programming, the development of several community outreach and education programs, launched new programs to provide shelter and support for homeless youth, and significantly contributed to the financial health and stability of nonprofits. Her track record of taking risks during times of organizational change is exceptional. Sherry holds a Bachelor of Social Work degree from the University of Wyoming, a Master of Social Work degree from New Mexico Highlands University, and is certified by the National Community Action Partnership as a Certified Community Action Professional. Over the past 10 years, she has received countless invitations to speaking engagements for networking events, community service initiatives, and youth empowerment programs. Sherry has been married 22 years to a brilliant computer programmer, Tim, and has 3 lovable children. DJ is 16 and driven by music and motorcycles. Sam is 14 and a computer genius who doesn't like to come out of his comfort zone and yet succeeds at everything he attempts to do. And Kara is 10 and spreads her sunshine and outrageous joy around all who encounter her. Come on up here, Sherry.
Hello. Okay, so I'm really hot. Do you guys care if I take off my jacket? Okay. You know, it's like these emotions going on, I think. Well, what an honor it is to be here. I'm throwing it. Oh, there we go. It's an honor to be amongst people here who give themselves day in and day out to help people who are in need of care. And I love that you invited the community. I think that that speaks volumes about this community and how important it is to lock arms about this really important cause. And I will also say, your Mother Nature's doing a good job of selling this place, because there was snow on the ground in Montana, and so I was really excited to come here and have to take off my jacket, so that's pretty awesome. You know, I want to say that eliminating poverty is absolutely a possibility. It's not a question of can we, it's really a question of will we. You know, I think that we all need to say it's unacceptable for people in America to go hungry or cold, or they can't pay for their medication. You know, it's mind-blowing that there's plenty of resources, and yet we have so much suffering. You know, there's an answer to all of this stuff, and my early childhood educating fellow people know what I'm talking about. Neuroscience has expanded and blown up in the past 28 years, and what we know about it is that the predictor, a profound predictor of health and wealth, is done in the age of neonatal, what is that word? When they're pregnant, and to the age of 5. And the fascinating thing is the brain is already developed by the age of 5, so it's at an adult size. And what we know from all this neuroscience is that if we don't expose them to things, words, the relationship, all of that kind of thing, the neurons will not connect with synapses, and it will actually die, and you'll never get it back again. So that's why it's so important. If everybody went through an early Head Start and a Head Start program, we would all be fine. Poverty would be eliminated, but that, of course, is not capable right now. There's such a gap between the wealthy and those without. I think it's so imperative that we make sure that youth have quality education, and we make sure that the elderly are warm and they have nutritious food. And it's important that our able bodies have employment, but not just a job, but to be able to pay for housing and food. I think it's just kind of crazy that we actually watch people that aren't receiving that care. Sergeant Shriver said so well, we believe that by connecting, engaging, and lifting each other up, remarkable things are possible. And as you'll get to know as I talk, optimism is my dominant trait for sure. And I want to share with you why I will always be a community action person. I will always be connected in that field. One of my greatest inspirations is Mark. So I met Mark quite a few years ago, and he was living in a cave. In Billings, we have kind of bluffs that are rock caves. And he would come into our drop-in center with spider bites all over him. And finally, one day, he trusted me enough to share his story. And he talked about his schizophrenic mom, who would hold his arm over boiling hot water just to play games with him, or make him go hungry for 3 days, and then give him soiled, rotten food to eat, and then he'd throw it up, and then she'd make him eat it again. And this kid, so he decided to live outside. He said, that's safer for me. And that kiddo walked 2 miles to our drop-in center to have a shower every day, went into the library and studied and got his GED, and then got a job as a busser at a restaurant until he saved enough money to go into a housing place. And he gives all the credit to our organization, even though clearly it's about him. But he had someone who said, I believe in you. There is hope. And so he didn't give up. Also, I think that it's important to say, one thing that we have to always do is listen. Not only just listen, but understand. I had a kiddo named Dion, and he was a homeless young man who really kind of was a leader among his peers. He would help the newbies figure out the ropes and stuff. And so I finally figured out that he has a relationship with all of them. And as those of you who serve teenagers, you know it takes a while to develop that trust, because every adult who was supposed to protect them have let them down. So Dion showed us where all the homeless kids were. He went with us on a street outreach. And the cool thing about it is that I hired him, first of all, for street outreach, duh. And then I said, how come we're leaving these packs all over and I don't see them? And he said, you have to look up. And I thought, what the heck does that mean? And he said, you know, in Montana, we have kind of flat tops, which we shouldn't because we have tons of snow, but apartment buildings and some of our businesses have a flat top, and they would climb up those fire escapes and sleep up there because they said they were afraid of the homeless adults. Another one had face painting on, black and white and all that kind of stuff, and I noticed I avoided him by crossing the street, and I went, wow, am I prejudiced against homeless teenagers? And I found out that they had the face paint because they didn't want any gangs approaching them. They wanted to scare you before you got them. You know, my DNA prohibits me from seeing human suffering and not doing something about it. I know sometimes it feels like we're all swimming upstream, sleep with one eye open, suffer a lot, worrying about everybody. But I tell you what, the moment we don't do that anymore is the moment we need to get out of this business. I think that it should upset us. I think that we have to have a really healthy balance, have people that we can talk to, and actually have hope where we know what we can do to help them. And I want to say I'm not unique. I'm not special because I see them, I hear them, I understand them. I believe that if we shared their stories more, that everybody would jump on. How could you not when you really understand that we're all deserving of care? We all should live in decency and dignity. I want to also share that I had an opportunity to meet some of these superheroes at the Community Action Agency, and what an honor it really is to be able to come out here and look you in the eyes and just say, keep fighting the good fight, because you're making a huge difference in this world. And the reality is, I get so emotional. We need to love louder. We all need to lock arms and make it happen. It's not a competition of who can serve the poor best. It's really about we need to make sure that all of us have the same opportunity. When one person suffers, we all suffer. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. Our next candidate is Jimmy Jones. He's the director of the Arches Project and the interim director of Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency. At Arches, he oversees 31 grants worth more than $6 million that fund 12 housing programs and 16 supportive services for the largest emergency housing provider in Marion and Polk counties and one of the largest in the state of Oregon. Arches programs and their collaborative partners have housed more than 500 households, assessed more than 5,200 unique homeless clients, and provided more than 30,000 meals in the past 2 years. Jimmy's specialty in homeless services is in systems design for service delivery. Jimmy designed the coordinated entry system that is in use in 28 of Oregon's 36 counties, including those in Marion and Polk counties. He has led the transformation locally and in the continuum towards evidence-based tools and coordinated assessment. He has presented across the state of Oregon on homeless service design and delivery, advised directly on a large number of homeless programs and projects outside the Marion Polk area, and is consistently consulted by local and statewide media, government agencies, and the Oregon legislature as a statewide expert on homelessness and housing. As the interim executive director of community action, Jimmy supervises more than 100 federal, state, and local grants for 8 large programs, including weatherization, energy, home youth and resource center, nutrition first, reentry services, child care resource and referral, Head Start, early Head Start, and the Arches Project, as well as over administration, all with a combined budget of nearly $31 million. Most recently, in administration, he's been working to build a solid finance department, formally adding full-time agency grant writing and closely monitoring improvements to the agency's auditing and compliance operations. Jimmy is the father of 6 and grandfather to 4 children, with 2 of them being in Head Start. He holds a PhD in American Cultural and Intellectual History from the University of Arkansas. He teaches European history, Western civilization, and global diversity courses part-time for Concordia University in Portland. He loves baseball, chess, distance running, and the Pacific Crest Trail. Jimmy and his wife, Jackie, live in Kaiser. Welcome, Jimmy Jones.
Good afternoon. I'm really excited to see so many folks turn out today, including a lot of folks that I've worked with on a very individualized and personal basis for the last 2 years on issues that relate to housing and homelessness in this particular community. Most of you who I already know me by the work that I've done, and I'm not going to repeat too much of that here today. I spend an awful lot of time in this community talking about numbers and systems and design and those populations which have been underserved and left out for far, far too long. And if you have followed my work for the last couple of years, you know that more than anything else, I've devoted my primary energy to making sure that those individuals who have not been recipients of needed services in the past have the opportunity to acquire those services in the future. So I spend a lot of time talking about the how, and a lot of time talking about the why, and a lot of time talking about how the agency, how the community, how the hospital, how the systems of policing and the jails, and how all of these agencies and organizations can save so much more money if they will embrace a little bit of a new philosophy and begin to target those individuals who are the most vulnerable in our community. I'm not going to talk about any of that here today. I'm going to talk about why I do this work. That's a subject I don't really address. I certainly don't address in a public forum very often, and not to a group of this mixed constituency, but I'm going to do it here today. And in that story, I'm going to talk about 3 people primarily. None of you know any of these 3 people, but they are the 3 individuals who have shaped my life more than anyone else. And I hope that in the telling of this tale that you'll get a little bit of understanding of why I think this work is so vital, why I think it has to be taken with the utmost seriousness and sobriety, and why I think that we all need to continue to struggle on a daily basis to get better, not only in our service delivery, but in the constructions of our agency and in a community response system to such serious matters. The first of these three individuals was my grandmother, who passed away on October the 10th, just a few days ago in 2002. My grandmother had grown up in Arkansas and Mississippi, where I'm from, working on a small cotton farm where she pulled a burlap sack, stuffing cotton in it as she went throughout most of her youth. She had completed a 10th grade education because in Arkansas at the time that was the highest level of education that you could get in that particular community. And by the time that I was born in 1968, she was already 64 years of age, and my mother worked in town at the co-op. My father spent most of his time in the field, so she pretty much was responsible for raising me instead of anyone else. By the time that I got old enough to really get into trouble, around 7 or 8 years old, roaming over several hundred acres of fields and farmland, she was already in her early 70s and having lived a fairly hard life did not necessarily need my level of energy or my ability to get into trouble on a farm at that particular age. But she was more than anyone else the person responsible for teaching me what was important in life, teaching me about my obligations and my duties to other people, and most importantly, teaching me about the power of education, which she insisted, and absolutely insisted that I follow at some point in time and go off to college, like my father had done so before me, but he had only survived 2 weeks, and it had turned into something of a family scandal since he had been the first one to go off to college. For year after year, she made sure that I was getting my work done, and even when I graduated high school, at a time when things had got very tough for us, she made sure that I always had the resources that I needed to go off to college and to study. And she continued to be the greatest source of strength in my life all the way up until the time she was 98 years of age and passed away from cancer. My father, the second person in this story, was born in 1942, the next to last child that my grandmother had. My father was somebody who graduated from high school in 1960 and graduated designated and most likely to succeed in his class. That was in 1960, and not long after, the pressures of the war and finances and things of that nature, he developed a very serious drinking problem and became a lifelong alcoholic. That was somebody who had a very difficult time navigating his daily barriers and finding a way to be a father and a provider and a model for the rest of us. He passed away in 2006 after he had lost the farm in the early 1990s. And his house and everything that he owned. He had become homeless for the last 15 years of his life and died as he spent much of those last 15 years drunk and homeless on a gravel road on a cold Arkansas morning in March of that year. At the time, I had gone off and started working in other parts of the country, and I felt like, looking back on that, one of the things that was the most horrible and terrible for me to deal with at the time was the fact that he and I had exchanged hundreds of letters over the course of the last 10 years, trying to work out what our collective futures were going to be. And my attitude toward him at the time was shame, embarrassment, and anger. After he died, I felt like, looking back on that I never did enough to help him get out of that situation. So one of the reasons that I do the work that I do today is that every time that I go to a homeless camp, and every time that I assess a client, and every time that I work the warming shelters, and every time that I'm in my day center, I see reflections of him and my lost opportunities in the past that now I have a chance to address. And the third person in this story is my oldest daughter. I do have 6 children, and telling you about all 6 of them would take more time than any of us have. But my oldest daughter and your oldest child is always the one, in a lot of ways, you invest the most hope in. It's the first opportunity to go out and to address all the wrongs that your parents had done to you and to lead them to a place where they'll be both happy and healthy and productive and live the life that your parents probably hoped that you would have lived. She was born in 1991, a couple of years after we lost the farm, and that may not sound like a whole lot to folks here and now, but if you grew up in the South, in the 60s and 70s as I did, you sort of losing the family farm, losing the home place was more than just a loss of a job. It was more than just a loss of a place to live. It was a loss of an identity and purpose. And so as my father struggled with that, so did I, while I was going to school and finishing up a bachelor and master's degree and trying to raise a family at the same time, working 4 part-time jobs as a graduate assistant, and just struggling to get by. My oldest daughter was a Head Start student, and I was a Head Start parent. And at the time, although we don't do this today, I was nominated to a role in our parent-led Head Start meetings. My role was a chaplain. And I don't think we currently have chaplains in our agency, and I think that's probably a practice that was exclusive to the South and is long gone. But I enjoyed every morning getting up, walking her to class, praying with that group, and then going home and waiting in the afternoon for all my obligations to be resolved so I could meet up with her again. And over the course of her life, we spent a lot of time traveling across the country, and I was able, because of resources that I did eventually acquire, to take her to Europe and take her to North Africa and a lot of other places that I had never had the opportunity to visit. And we would take long car rides across the country, from Texas to Georgia, up to New York, all the way out to the Grand Canyon and many other places where she and I would sit up most of those nights while the rest of the kids were asleep in the back of the van and talk long into the night and listen to news stories and consider the great questions of the day. And I was enormously proud of her, am still today. She eventually graduated from McNary High School. She graduated from Morgan State University with a degree in philosophy. Now, as a parent, when your child tells you that they want a degree in philosophy, your first response is somewhat of concern. How are you going to pay for that? I used to have an English professor who told his parents once, he said that he was, he wanted to be a poet. And that didn't go over well either, nor did that philosophy degree go over well with me. Today, however, she graduated and works for a nuclear power company, so there are a lot of Homer Simpson jokes in our house that each one of these 3 people have taught me something really critical about my life. My grandmother taught me the basic lessons that I learned about the need to help others, and that we are all part of a larger human family, and we have an obligation and duty and responsibility to the weakest and most vulnerable members of our community. And the more that we turn our back on them, not only does it injure them, it injures something within ourselves. It damages some part of our soul so badly that if we continue along that course for a great period of time, something about us never fully recovers. My father taught me a lot of things in life, but the last lesson he taught me was that shame and regret and anger are not the proper responses to a loved one who is suffering from whatever crisis they may be suffering. The people that I work with today suffer from mental health circumstances, they suffer from substance abuse problems, they suffer from physical health problems, they suffer from the trauma of being homeless, and then they suffer from the trauma of being housed. But what I really learned from that was that there is an opportunity for redemption, and that what I can do today in housing one person at a time, ending homelessness for whom I can, and eventually, hopefully one day, I dream of a world where I can end all of chronic homelessness in Salem. We're a long way from that goal, but I think that is the primary thing that I would spend the rest of my life working toward. And then from my daughter, I learned that so much is possible with the young generation. So my agency spends an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of resources, an enormous amount of energy educating young folks, trying to make sure that not only do they have a head start on school, but also a head start on life, a head start on the things that, frankly, some of the times their parents aren't able to deliver, a head start on opportunity. Yesterday, still sort of trying to craft out what I was going to say today. There are a lot of ways that I could have approached this. Many of you probably have heard me speak many times. But yesterday, I spent Sunday afternoon cleaning up about a year's worth of abandoned items between one of our buildings and a neighboring building over by the main office. And what I cleaned up there were the things you'd normally expect whenever you clean up any homeless camp. You found tarps, you found clothing, you found food, you found a little bit of drugs, you found some needles, you found some alcohol, you found a little bit of everything. Found a lot of surgical gloves, which if you do the work, you understand the craft, you know that's frequently a way in which the homeless population hide drugs. But the thing that I wasn't really ready for, the thing I hadn't prepared for in my head, was that I found a couple of cell phone cases that a child owned, obviously. And then I found a pair of blue jeans that would have fit a 9 or 10-year-old girl. It wasn't somebody who was 45 and 50 and 55 and 60 out there camping in that alleyway. It was a mother and her daughter. We hadn't known about it. We hadn't done anything about it. We hadn't seen it, but it had been there for more than a year. And so as I cleaned all that up, I wondered who they were and why they'd come to that spot in particular. It's not terribly isolated from the elements. It's pretty exposed. Who would want to camp there? And I hoped, in answering that question, that it wasn't one of our former students who would come there because that was a place that she and her mother was comfortable. And I hoped that whatever had happened to them, it had been a positive outcome, and I hoped more than anything else they were somewhere housed and safe today. But I don't think that most people, when they look at this problem, when they stumble through the downtown, when they look at Wallace Marine Park, when they're out at Cascade Gateway, and they see collections of trash, when the Department of Transportation comes along to clean things up, I don't believe that they see those broken human stories first and the products of living in that particular situation second. I had no intention of applying for this job when I moved over to the main office. Absolutely none. But working over there, I came to believe over time that our agency had struggled. And I had known in the 90s when I had young children what it was like to have to choose whether or not you bought gasoline for the car or school supplies. I get that. And I come to realize that most of the struggles we had had were things I understood and could fix going forward. So the best way to protect my work, to protect the legacy of my family, to protect the people that I serve, in the end, I decided to apply for this position. And I hope, God willing, that I'll be able to continue to do this work in this role or some other for a long time. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the candidate statements. If we could have Sherry go that direction, and Jimmy, if you could go that direction, just so we can take a few minutes to meet them. There's comment cards, there's water, some snacks. Just feel free to help yourself and enjoy. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, and so does the agency.